I hope you got your water, your popcorn ready. Eric's got a good presentation lined up for us. So I'll let Hayden go ahead and introduce Eric.
Awesome. Appreciate that, Corey. Also appreciate Fit for helping us put this on. Me and Corey kind of had a dream of getting a whole soccer performance webinar just for related to soccer, and Fit really helped us do that. So thank you again. Eric is a performance coach for Philadelphia Union second team. He's been with them since August 24. He served as the academy performance coach at the Union since December 20, or from December 21 to August 23rd. He has been with Austin FC. He's kind of been all over. He's worked at the University of Virginia also. He's had that perspective of the college and the pro level, and he's bringing that to this presentation today. He holds his CSES. He's worked with top level athletes, and we were talking about a little earlier, but he's had the opportunity to work with one of the most highly scouted, taught individuals in, I would say, MLS right now, coming up in the MLS. And if you haven't saw that, he was the youngest, had the youngest debut in the MLS, which is incredible. So to have the perspective of being able to work with athletes like that and to bring that today is truly incredible. I'm very excited to hear what Eric has to say. So take it away, Eric.
Yeah, wow. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the kind words. Yeah, we'll get to it. I'll share my screen. All right. Can everyone see that? Okay.
Yeah, it looks great.
All good. Okay. Yeah, so I've really enjoyed the presentation so far for sure. This presentation will definitely be a lot more performance oriented and maybe a little more technical jargon in there for the kind of S&C and speed enthusiasts in the audience. But yeah, I guess the discussion today will center around linear acceleration. So how at the Union we go about training linear acceleration. So kind of going into the technical model where that kind of fits in. But then also how within an in-season schedule with all kind of the chaos, kind of navigating the different challenges and barriers, how you go about managing that training within that sort of environment. So hopefully, you know, things that can be pretty relatable to a lot of the people on this call. And I hope, you know, you guys take something out of it. I know this is a, you know, topic that I'm pretty passionate about. I wouldn't say I'm a speed expert, like Rob said, but I am definitely an enthusiast about this topic. So yeah, hopefully you guys can get something out of it. Yeah, so just to first kind of give everyone some context on what I do. I work at the Philadelphia Union, and I am in kind of a unique position where I'm able to have an impact on physical development throughout all three levels of the organization. And I can definitely say, or I'm fortunate to say that I work at a club that really, you know, truly values the development of youth talent. And I think that's something I would always kind of say, working in the developmental space, but you can, you know, you can say for sure just being around every single day, you can really feel it, just how the club goes about our business. So first for our, you know, MLS Next Pro team, our second team, we're the youngest team in the league. Our average age is 18. So trusting the youth in that way. And then beyond that, you know, especially in recent history, Hayden made mention of it. We've had some success stories in terms of guys actually signing homegrown contracts and making their, you know, pro debuts at young ages. So these are some super talented, motivated young guys that I've been fortunate enough to work with. So there's Kevin there on the right, who's 14 years old. So it's, you know, truly stunning that he's able to do that. I don't know really what I was doing at 14. I don't even know if I could tell you. And then on the right there, we have CJ and Andrew Rick, who I've also worked with in the academy setting as well, who also made their pro debuts. So, it's amazing to see, but ultimately, I think it really speaks to the need for having a high quality system around physical development from, young ages in the academy all the way up to Union 2, which is the level directly below the first team. So we're, to the best degree, physically preparing these guys, these top prospect guys who are on an accelerated pathway like that, so they can thrive when they actually get their chance at the highest level. Yeah, so in terms of an outline, I first wanted to map out, why does linear acceleration training matter in football first. Second, and this will kind of be the more technical portion of the presentation, we'll go through more so the recipe for effective and efficient acceleration. So going through a model that I use, was made popular by Jonas Dadu of Speedworks over in the UK. And then a quick case study there within my own environment. And then finally, this will be kind of the meat of the presentation. How do we at Union 2 go about training that ability of linear acceleration and managing it within, the context of an in-season environment. So in the gym, on field, and then finally, this will kind of speak to the theme of this webinar, getting other departments on board with this kind of speed-based approach. So weaving in kind of the theme of this webinar, collaborating with different departments, kind of after our more technical, portion of the presentation. Yeah, so first kind of going over, why is linear acceleration, matter in football? So first, in terms of driving team success, team results, we know from these descriptive studies that although sprinting takes up a low percentage of match activity, so 1 to 3% of total distance, it's actually the most common action before a goal scored. So clear link there between high speed moments and then the thing that determines results in games. And then taking that a step further, these descriptive studies have found that sprint efforts rarely exceed 20 meters, right? So it's not to say that top speed isn't important as well, but it's just to say that these shorter sprints happen more frequently in the game. So that should kind of inform your, performance strategy and what we're kind of favoring in your speed training. And then in terms of preparing for physical demands, we know the game is getting increasingly faster every year. So guys are hitting higher top speeds. They're hitting higher sprinting volumes. So we have to be kind of on top of that. And then we also know that accelerations make up, they're a high frequency event within the game, right? So kind of on an intensity and volume standpoint, this makes up a pretty significant physical stressor to the game. So again, from a physical preparation standpoint, we have to be on top of that and in a proper way, prepare our guys for this heavy physical stressor that they'll see from the game. So, if there's a mismatch between what the game demands and what our players are physically prepared to do, that's when you start seeing guys, break down, and in, worst case, injuries happen, lack of availability, like, Rob was talking about before. Yeah, and then kind of taking it a step further, we know that linear acceleration can be really critical to individual performance on the field. So we see guys like Mbappe on the attacking side of things, where he's probably not hitting these crazy top speeds, but it's his ability to create a lot of speed early in a sprint, and ultimately create separation and make these game-changing plays Whereas also on the defensive side, someone like Kyle Walker is known for his ability to eliminate separation with having really high levels of, being really elite at that ability, right? So I think that's what, it's kind of a key ability for what makes these guys so elite within their positions within the world, right? So I think this is a clip that really, showcases that. Yeah, so you can see he creates a lot of speed from low speeds, and then within his first few steps, really gets up to a high speed. Yeah, and then beyond that, seeing how linear acceleration kind of plays into how the Union, approach the game, our game model, which I can definitely say is not the prettiest brand of football, but it is, I think, a pretty effective one where essentially the game model is turn the other team over, get forward up the field as fast as possible, and score goals. So we say defend to score goals. And I think this clip really encapsulates that and shows first on the defensive side, a really critical acceleration to win the ball back, to start the transition. And then you see, CJ only able to create separation from his defender and create a really, incredible assist to get us back in the game. So starting the transition, he's able to explode into the space, create separation, and then again, get us back into the game. It's a crucial play. So both, at the elite level and then close to home within our game model, acceleration can be really critical within the context of the game. Yeah, so now more speaking to the technical model that I lean on for developing efficient and effective acceleration. Yeah, so before getting into the details of that technical model, I think distinguishing between these two terms is pretty important because I think there is this whole subgroup of people in the industry who think that, we should leave the track and field concepts aside, and it's not even worth teaching toward any sort of sprinting technical model. We should just let athletes run how they kind of run. But I think most people who are with the times would agree that the easy answer to that question is we want to take from track and field to make our athletes run more efficiently or sprint more efficiently, which is super critical. So kind of distinguishing between the two, effectiveness is more so just looking at an outcome regardless of a movement strategy. So purely how fast was your 10-meter time or what was the top speed? Whereas efficiency really looks at what was the time and what was the movement strategy to actually achieve that outcome, right? So we can take from the best in the world over there on the left that there are just these certain body positions, shapes, and patterns that are more effective and more efficient, and we should probably mirror that in the training of our athletes. So what does kind of efficiency mean within the context of team sport, besides hopefully being fast? So it can mean injury risk mitigation, so probably less muscular strain happening. We know from an injury prevention standpoint that things like, running in a certain way could trigger hamstring injury, groin injury, things like that. Running more efficiently also means more economy, right? So less fatigue buildup means that you can repeat these high intensity actions more so throughout a 90-minute game, super important. And then finally, being ready for the next play, right? So if we take a 10-meter acceleration, are you getting to that 10-meter spot and almost falling on your face? Or are you getting to that 10-meter spot in an efficient body position to break and then change direction in another way, which could be, a critical moment in a game. And we want to train that quality within our athletes. Yeah, so now just looking at the recipe for being efficient and effective within your sprinting and kind of taking from, again, what the best people, what the fastest people in the world do. Okay, so in terms of that recipe, we know that big forces are super critical to actually propel yourself forward, but that's probably not the end all be all. We also need big forces in small time frames, right? So we know that when we're running at high speeds, ground contact time is extremely short. It's around 100 milliseconds. So it's about, can we produce a ton of force in very limited time? And then beyond that, can we orient those forces in the right direction? Okay, so if you look at the great work from J.B. Marin, he's proven that orienting force in the horizontal direction is critical to acceleration performance, right? So we want to train that within our athletes and be informed by that. So it's probably best when we're trying to attack that recipe to try and accomplish this via both physical and technical interventions, right? So if you take the analogy of a car, we both want to build up the engine of that car, so the physical side, but we also want to develop skilled drivers to operate that super powerful engine. Okay, so if you take that, Formula One car on the right there, and say if I was driving a super, powerful car, that's when you would probably crash the car. And in our case, that would mean, this super powerful athlete who doesn't know how to move maybe gets injured. Okay, so we kind of need to work both sides of that spectrum. Yeah, so actually getting into the technical model that I use, again, it was brought on by the people over at Speedworks, Jonas Dadu, and I find that it works pretty well in the team sport environment. And it's kind of built off three core heuristics. So projection, switching, and reactivity. And we'll go through all three within the next few slides. But the key reason why I think it's such a good system is that, and I find this with all the top people in this space, is that they're able to take something that's very complex and complicated, sprinting, and knowing what's kind of good and bad, and they're able to simplify it into this really simple to explain, simple to follow framework of three things. So when you're watching someone sprint and there's a lot going on, you can really get lost in the detail. You can really go back to these three things and know whether that was an efficient sprint or not. And you can also know where to go for your kind of technical interventions, kind of how to remedy the situation. Okay, so kind of to go back to the message we had before, sprint times give you an outcome, but really this sort of technical model looking at projection, switching, and reactivity can tell the story behind a sprint and kind of be a roadmap towards what you would do with that athlete and how you would make him a more efficient sprinter, or more efficient at sprinting within his sport. Yeah, so first getting into projection and its kind of place in acceleration. So projection is basically covering big ranges and big shapes each stride. Okay, so each stride, can you create this big push and travel forward? Can you displace yourself forward? Okay, so we know for that to happen, we have to create large forces. So from a physical side, there's force generation at those prime movers within acceleration, so the hip extensors, plantar flexors. But from a technical side, we also need to orient ourselves forward, right? So as far as the shin and trunk, can we orient ourselves forward to actually use that force that we created? So we have two really good examples there on the right, and on the bottom there is one of my athletes. So you can, maybe this paints a picture for you guys how you might look at video and judge whether, okay, that was a really good projection on that acceleration. What projection also does is it prepares you for the next stride. So you're traveling forward, but you're also preparing to whack the ground on your next stride, right? So if you think about a hammer, can you raise your thigh up raise the hammer up, and really hit the ground hard on that next stride. And you can also see that in those two pictures. All right, next is switching. So this is essentially what happens in the air. So we've kind of created that big shape off our first step, projection. Can you actually close up that shape rapidly and attack the ground? So that's, again, a really good example on the top there of switching, where it's open and then close the shape as quickly as possible. So on a physical side, we want RFD around the hip. We want pelvic stability. And then from a technical side, it's really about teaching how to switch and just being violent. And we've also seen from the research, Ken Clark is amazing in the speed space, and he's identified TAV, or thigh angular velocity, as a critical variable to separate the top sprinters in the world compared to worse sprinters and team sport athletes. And thigh angular velocity is just a fancy word for being good at switching. So it's definitely something we would want to improve in our athletes. Yeah, and then finally, reactivity. So this is essentially what happens at ground contact, and can you be really reactive and elastic off the ground and almost bounce into your next step, right? So we'll look at a video here of Christian Coleman, who is probably the best accelerator in the world ever. So it's probably a good idea to take from what he does. So we'll watch that video, but from a physical side, we want to develop that stiffness in the lower leg so we can bounce off the ground each stride. And then from a technical side, can you develop pre-tension and be prepared to hit the ground, right? So we all, maybe the S&C people in the room, know a basic pogo jump, and we know the difference between when you create stiffness before hitting the ground so you can bounce versus having kind of a soft, sloppy ankle and foot where you kind of just melt into the ground. That wouldn't be something that would be good when you're trying to create a lot of speed. So yeah, this would be a really good example of reactivity. Yeah, so what you're looking on the video, is his ability to keep his heel up and not to let that heel drop. And that would show you he has really good reactivity. Yeah, and then kind of just rounding this off, this would be a case study from my own environment of where, with kind of in this IDP, individualized work setting, I was able to improve one of these heuristics around his, running efficiency and actually link it to an improved 10-meter time, improved outcome around acceleration. So this was an athlete who came in from another MLS club, and we do our kind of initial testing, but it was really clear that from a profile side of things, he was just kind of built for speed. So very much unlike me, he was very lean and elastic, and his parents are actually they're both Olympic sprinters. So you want to talk about, elite level genetics to, provide you for a lot of speed potential. But when we did run our initial 40-meter testing, he was only kind of average to below average on his 10-meter time, which kind of rung some alarm bells. So immediately you look at the video and pretty clearly we can see a clear inability to project off the line. So you can see where his hip is in reference to his foot. He's not traveling very far. And he's also projecting himself up and not horizontal, like we talked about. So you can see kind of the vector there. So we did, a 6-week intervention, did just some basic drills and methods I've found to really remedy that type of situation. So some postural isometrics on the wall, some projection drills, sled resisted work will be probably your best bang for buck when it comes to acceleration. And then after that 6-week intervention, it looks really good in a presentation, but we were able to drop his 10-meter time down, and he was now ranked first in the squad. And you can see on the video, things are a lot more clean now. He's able to throw himself and project off the line, project more horizontally, right? So to me, that was a clear link between improving efficiency within the sprint and actually linking it to, okay, he's faster over 10 meters now for someone who's just naturally built for speed before and after. So that was a cool little case study there. Yeah, so now moving on to kind of the more practical side of things. How you would kind of weave in this sort of training within the context of an in-season chaotic environment. So we'll kind of go through some of the barriers and challenges. Again, I'm sure many people deal with. And then beyond that, how do you build this culture around speed and involve the different departments to kind of get the buy-in and have everyone on the same page? Yeah, so first looking at how do we address acceleration with gym-based solutions. And I can definitely say that the whole strength and conditioning program isn't devoted to this, but as we talked about, it's a really critical ability in the game. So it should be, an important element within your program throughout a year. So in terms of building the engine that would support acceleration, we need to kind of work back from, the characteristics of a short acceleration, right? So we know creating large forces relative to your body weight would be really critical and actually pushing yourself forward each step. In terms of the explosive work, a lot of it will be concentric dominant, just like an acceleration, and longer ground contact times. We know that reactive strength around the foot and ankle, Achilles, is really important, again, for bouncing off the ground and not getting kind of stuck in the mud, melting into the ground. And then dosing in some special strength as well, where ideally you're pushing a physical stimulus that would support improvements in acceleration, but you're also addressing, various technical concepts and these key shapes, body positions at the same time within the same exercise. So again, kind of two birds with one stone there. All right, so kind of taking you guys through some examples within, this is our second team guys that would very much relate to, trying to address training acceleration. So for our explosive work, we'll kind of earn the right to do your more intensive type plyos and jumps. We'll do a lot of loaded work, kind of seated box jumps, those sort of thing, horizontal jumps, where you'll see in this clip. So I'll play that. I'll kind of mark it out to give guys a target to kind of drive an intent. And you can see kind of similar qualities being trained to what would be important in acceleration. In terms of maximal strength, kind of hitting our force production there, we will hit our heavier lifts. But I've definitely found, especially in season, to use overcoming ISOs as a way of hitting a similar stimulus, but not having the same fatigue response as you might with a, heavy back squat, heavy trap bar deadlift, that sort of traditional lifting. So it seems to be the better option. And normally guys don't love, especially in season, picking up or looking at a ton of weight on a bar, soccer guys specifically. So, it seems to be the better option there. And then in terms of special strength, in the gym, I'll typically do my heavier resisted accelerations, since there's a lot of weight around and there's not too much room with the turf. So you can see video here. And we know that's, a really effective way of improving initial acceleration. Again, going back to the JB Marin work. And then different sort of projection drills. Again, having them feel what a big shape feels like without actually doing an acceleration. And then some yielding isometrics and acceleration relevant positions as well. Yeah, so then in terms of on-field solutions, and we'll get to in a few slides how you would kind of manage sprint volumes within an in-season context and throughout a season as well, preseason and in-season. But for now, just going through how I would format a linear acceleration warm-up that would typically lead us into our extensive day, right? So how it goes is I typically have 18 minutes max, so I have to get a lot in within that time, so you got to be efficient. But we will go through our general prep normally, some mobility, lower level plyos. We'll try to potentiate the system with some more intensive plyos. We'll get through some postural drills, so really trying to hit the efficient postures that will be helpful during, acceleration, max velocity. We'll then move to more higher transfer drills. So this is where I'll have the resistor work in there. We're getting much closer now to accelerating maximally. And I think the key thing here, especially when you're working with big groups, which I'm sure a lot of people on this call can relate to, is instead of stopping the group for multiple minutes to make a coaching point, allowing the constraint or the exercise itself to do your coaching, right? So instead of me stopping the group, the sled does a lot of our teaching for us. It tells our athletes to push back hard and to point themselves in a horizontal direction, right? And I don't really have to even say anything. I'm just kind of giving short coaching cues because I know I have 18 minutes and I got to go. So we'll do that, and that'll kind of lead us to our high-speed stimulus, which we'll run some competitive races to a prescribed distance, right? So we know this is kind of the main event. Guys accelerating maximally, sprinting maximally is probably the most potent tool we have to actually making guys faster, making guys more elite at acceleration, right? But I think it's a tricky thing to get right in that you need intent. So I think for me, it's about education, letting the guys know why it's important, why we're doing it. And then I'll kind of, you're trying to take advantage of their competitive nature. So the races help. But then beyond that, I'll double down on the intent side of things, and I'll actually plan our technical coaches, the guys who are making decisions on who plays. I'll kind of plant them at the finish line and they'll yell out the winners. So between those few things, you don't see guys really rein it in too often. Everyone's pretty good about giving intent in terms of sprinting to the prescribed distance. But in the case when they're not, ready and prepared on the day to sprint and exert maximally, there's a lot of collaboration with the medical staff, mainly with our head athletic trainer on, okay, maybe we'll talk before the session, maybe this guy needs to be on a plan B flow and kind of do build up sprints instead, where he can kind of manage himself. In that case, we're kind of prioritizing that guy being ready for the session and not competing in this, pretty physically straining event. So got some videos. This would be our switching drills, resist sprints, and the competitive races. All right, so we'll keep it moving. Yeah, so kind of there, just going over the ideal scenarios for the gym and on field, how we would train acceleration. But now we'll kind of go through how we weave that in within the context of these different in-season barriers and challenges. So first, we know when you're in season, these guys are going through a ton of physical work throughout a week. So with that, you get a ton of accumulated fatigue, where there's actually not too much room left to do high intensity work, right? So how do you kind of program your sprint work around what's already happening, what the players are already enduring throughout a week and throughout a season? Yeah, kind of similar to that congested match schedule. I know for us, and it definitely applies to MLS, you will have 3 games within the period of 8 days a lot of the time. So in some cases, there really isn't a day leading into the next game where you could sprint and feel good about your guys being ready to perform at their best on match day. So we kind of have to know our relative importance within the grand scheme of preparing the players to perform maximally during their, competition. Conflicting ideologies, I think, is a big one when having conversations with technical coaches, and it could be players too. So you could run into cases where, the head coach who is in charge did some sort of physical training method when he was coming through, and maybe he had a lot of success with that. But maybe it runs interference to what you want to do in the gym or on the field. So you kind of have to, stand up for your stuff and educate and let him know that maybe this is the better thing for preparing the players. But sometimes you do just have to roll with what the head coach wants, and kind of just do your best with it. Player movement across the teams. So this is a big one for Union 2, where we have players going up from the academy and then down from the first team. So you'll have guys coming in who maybe had a really taxing session, physically taxing session the day before, or maybe they're close to a game. So you have to kind of account for that when maybe it's time for your guys to sprint. So, it really necessitates frequent and early communication across teams to try and get that right. And then finally, dealing with players, and again, coaches from different sort of backgrounds, different cultures, where maybe they're literally lifting a weight for the first time ever with you. And they've made it this far without doing any sort of weight room work. So as S&C coaches, we know what's right, but they might not have the same passion for the physical work that we do. So again, you have to build relationships, establish trust, and educate on and work with these guys on how, this sort of training, acceleration training, this work in the gym could really make you a better footballer. Not just lift a lot of weight, but a better footballer. I think that's the real key message. Yeah, so now getting into how you would kind of program this sort of training within the context of a team season, right? So I think the programming of sprint volumes is a really key thing, especially when you're in season, to get right, where we want to build a robust group of players. And we also want to maintain speed qualities, even when we're in season, and not let our foot off the gas. We want to maximize performance on match day. So the approach I use is one that was brought about by legendary track coach Charlie Francis. It's the short to long approach, where when the guys first report in for preseason, when we do our sprint work, it's kind of consists of high repetition of very short sprints, right? So we're not exposing them to too high of speeds and too high of tissue stress when maybe they're not prepared to cope with that stress. That takes us into late preseason, where, similar to the on-field, football work, the gym work, we're gradually increasing sprint volume and the speeds these guys are hitting by increasing the distance they sprint to, and that's during those competitive races. And then in season, we're hitting minimal volume and trying to get this weekly sprint exposure. So our kind of target is 93% of max velocity to make sure, again, we're hitting sprint robustness, maintaining our speed qualities. And really the distance of the sprint will go up and down based on what else is happening within the session and within the training week, right? So if there's a lot of sprinting happening in the rest of the session, I'm not going to have guys sprint to 35 meters, most likely. If there's not as much, I can dial it up a little bit. So it necessitates frequent and early communication across departments. Yeah, so now kind of weaving in the sprint training and kind of that sort of the physical preparation to the tactical and technical overall preparation of the players, to try and, again, optimize fitness and maximize performance on the field. So I'm sure a lot of people on this call are familiar with tactical periodization, but essentially it's the idea where we have, depending on proximity from the match, we have a really clear physical emphasis for each day, and we build our physical work and technical work around that physical emphasis and really match things up. Okay, so when it comes to the speed work, that naturally falls on our extensive day, the heaviest day of the week, right in the middle there, where we still have 3 days leading up to the game. And within the session, we're already doing high speed running, sprinting in these big spaces. So in addition to try and make guys faster with your acceleration training, you want to potentiate guys with your warm-up, potentiate guys and prepare them for what's happening next in the technical drills that they'll come up on following your warm-up, right? So can the acceleration training potentiate a transition drill that we'll talk a little bit about in the next slide? And then we do use GPS as well. So kind of checking in to see, compared to past extensive days, where we can see here on the top, and this is our last, 8 extensive days, where were we at today compared to what we expected to happen based on the session kind of training prescription of those different parameters. And you can see we're normally pretty good at staying within those targets and within those ranges. And then kind of following along with weekly targets as well. And similar to how Rob was talking, we'll build it out compared to percentage of what they would do in a match, right? So this top guy, I've blocked out the names, but this top guy is someone who plays 90 minutes every match. And then those bottom 3 guys are guys who they're really training players who don't get the match minutes. So that could kind of inform you on potential top ups and having everyone kind of on the same fitness schedule, so to speak. Yeah, so then kind of giving you guys an example of how we go about session design with Union 2 and trying to stay relevant using an extensive day that we had, I think, a few months ago. So, I think having success here is a lot on understanding within your own environment, of course, input, setting up an input, your prescription, and what output does that drive? And that would be kind of the bottom picture there in terms of the GPS metrics. So in terms of the prescription, how it goes for us, our process is that our head coach, Marlon LeBlanc, will decide drill type. So he'll pick out the drills, he'll decide player numbers and dimensions. He'll send that over to me, and I'll build out the number of bouts, the number of rounds, the number of bouts, and the work to rest intervals within those drills. And you can see there on the left, in a very kind of tactical periodization way, everything kind of falls under this theme of high speed running, sprinting, running into larger spaces, right? So we have our lower limb prep, warming up the posterior chain. This was the day we did our band resisted series. And then ideally that really to a high level prepares the guys physically to do the higher speed transition drills and play in a large sided game, right? So this drill on the left is probably within our entire drill library, the one that involves the highest speeds, the highest sprint volumes, and also the need to repeat those high intensity actions, right? So can we prepare guys for that sort of drill, or are we just doing something general and not specifically preparing them, right? So then on the bottom, in terms of output, again, Rob, I think, made mention of it in his presentation, but we do use Catapult Live to inform some of the prescription in the moment. But to his point, I rarely will step in and try and manipulate something around. 1, because our head coach is pretty handy with sticking to the targets. And 2, it really does require some feel and discretion where, I've played the game before. And I understand that doing, 50 sprint meters more than you expected does not mean guys will all of a sudden go down injured and just explode in the moment and something bad will happen. So I think, it necessitates some discretion there. And then finally, on the bottom right there, this is our drill breakdown as part of kind of the post-training GPS report that we send back to the coaches. And you can kind of see based on the prescription, the input that we had, where were we at within each drill? And do we need to, compared to past extensive days we had, manipulate some parameter around to stay to our target so we know we're keeping guys healthy, basically. So you can tell within some of these drills that there's a decent sprint volume, high speed running, and some pretty good distances that they're doing. Yeah, and now just last few slides here. Kind of some key principles that I've found have been somewhat successful when you're in these conversations with coaches and kind of getting them on board with this, again, speed-based approach. So one, I think when you're talking through your plans, it shouldn't be in terms of speaking about biomechanics and overly kind of technical jargon, because I think you'll typically lose people pretty quick. It should be, this conversation should be in terms of facilitating their plans, right? So the tactical and technical side of things. And specifically kind of forming it around that specific game model. So for instance, you did this linear acceleration training. Hey, this guy could accelerate into open space during this attacking transition moment. That's really critical to our game model. I think that's a message that coaches would rather hear. And then beyond that, trying really hard not to get in the way with your content. So it could be, taking too much time during an activation. It could be blowing guys up in the weight room. That sort of thing probably won't win you so many friends. So I think that's a great slide there that from an Alex Vitera presentation. We want to be complementary. We do not want to be oppositional in our training. So then second, we want the speed work to provide availability and robustness and be seen as a tool which can really protect guys from sprint-related injury and not something that injures guys, right? So that wouldn't go over so well with the technical coach if a key player is going down directly because of your thing. That probably won't go down so well. So it needs to be seen as a positive thing that can really keep guys available if we do it in the right way. And then finally, not being afraid to show progress from your work, right? So I think a lot of people can talk a big game, and that can actually get you pretty far sometimes. But ultimately, high-level people will want you to show some sort of progression if they're giving you this sort of time and resources with their guys, right? So it could be testing results, it could be GPS outputs that have improved because of your training. It definitely could be in-game moments that are seen on film, right? So we know that technical sport coaches watch a ton of film, and I'm trying to do better on that myself, watch film. But if you can connect a before and after, an improvement and acceleration seen within the game film, that's something that, speaks volumes to a technical coach. And I've had a little bit of success in that sort of conversation. Yeah, so then last kind of portion here, kind of how you would collaborate with the medical side of things. Where does linear acceleration fit within late stage rehab, right? So how we do it at the union is me and the head athletic trainer, who's very good with her on-field rehab, will kind of meet before training, and either one of us will kind of take that session. But we both kind of agree that in terms of a framework, we use the Control to Chaos Continuum by Matt Taberner, which I think really works well in the practical space. But yeah, in terms of where linear acceleration fits, it fits within the player's return to speed as they're kind of gradually getting reintroduced to the physical demands of the game and getting closer to being re-included in training, right? So we know, like we talked about before, acceleration is this critical high intensity action. So we need to address that with our preparation of that player before he jumps back into a chaotic game, right? So using GPS to guide you there. And then beyond that, can you create a foundation of speed, like we kind of talked about with the healthy guys, through many repetitions of shorter sprints to prepare these guys who are not quite ready to do the longer sprints so they can get there eventually, because they're going to need to get there if they want to play in a match, right? So creating that foundation, I've definitely used the 10 by 10 protocol. If anyone hasn't heard of that, it's definitely worth looking into if you're in kind of the performance rehab space. And then beyond that, as guys are getting closer to returning, how can you progressively introduce complexity within your rehab? So including the ball, doing different sort of cognitive stimuli, making it specific to their position within your technical work. For those ball included sessions, I could definitely do it if I wanted to. I'm still pretty, sharp on the ball. But I find including coaches gives you a lot of, pushes the motivation factor for these guys who might not be in the best mood, and actually makes them feel like they're close to being back with the team, back in training, rather than kind of training with the performance guy, the gym guy. Yeah, and then finally, last slide, some key considerations here to round it up. Pretty obvious, but I think it's worth touching on having a clear plan that everyone's kind of agreed upon, from medical, performance, technical, on when we're going to return a guy, what's kind of the timeline, and getting on that plan early, communicating early and frequently about that plan. And I think it was kind of mentioned in the last few presentations, but the nightmare is that you're asking a coach at the last second, hey, can this guy be in this drill? I think that's not a good way to go about it. Beyond that, having criteria-based progressions, so not just throwing a guy to the wolves, knowing, hey, for a hamstring injury, you hit 90% of your max velocity, we're pretty confident that you're ready to be in this transition drill, for instance. And then finally, just being adaptable, and that kind of goes for all spaces and high performance. There could be scenarios where maybe we did a session, the following day, the athletic trainer comes to me and says, hey, he's feeling really banged up. Maybe we need to dial it back. And you kind of have to have a plan B in your mind to kind of get that guy back to his normal, so we can keep kind of the progression, getting him, closer and closer to returning to team and ultimately to matches. And that's all I got. Thank you guys for taking the time, and thanks everyone for listening.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. We do have a question here. How do you manage and collaborate on those players that are going from the second team to the first team, or vice versa from the first team to the second team?
How do you manage and collaborate?
Yeah, with the first team performance staff.
Yeah, it is tricky for sure. There's normally, especially coming off matches, there's normally group chats set up. So as quick as humanly possible, there's someone who will kind of send a message to the chat and say, hey, these guys are available for training. They'll be with you. But, it doesn't, that's kind of the ideal scenario, being fully transparent, actually, because, normally, say there's like a first team game on a Wednesday and we have a game kind of closely coming up. It's kind of unclear if these reserve first team guys will be available for our training or they're needed for the +1 first team training. So it can actually be a little bit last minute, but you got to do your best, kind of control what you can control, and definitely, check the group chat as frequently as possible.
So with another question, utilizing GPS, utilizing all the metrics on there, right? If you're utilizing Catapult, there's hundreds of metrics. What is some way you could, let a young professional know getting into this field and having to, work with catapult or things like that for the first time? What would be your advice to them?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely easy to get completely lost and swept away in the details. Um, yeah, I think there's a saying out there like detect the signal from all the noise. I think when you're first starting off, and I'm not like a GPS expert, or I'm more of like a S&C based guy, but I do handle it as kind of the one-man band at Union 2. I think when you're first starting off and maybe you just got access to GPS with whatever system you're using, it's like always simpler is better, especially if you're kind of on your own handling that. And even if it's as simple as RPE and just getting subjective feedback from the players, and you're able to build some robust reporting systems around just that, which people have done really successfully before there was access to external load monitoring, so maybe building out a robust reporting system, where you can like frequently and accurately report things to the coach and other departments rather than trying to monitor, all 400 metrics that Catapult offers and totally getting lost in the sauce, where now you're not able to give informed feedback to the coach, which is the whole point of this, right? It's not to mess around with these fancy metrics. I'll leave that to guys like Kyle. But yeah, full transparency, our GPS reporting system was built out by Joe Trocchio, who's the lead sports scientist at the first team level, and Walter Grandes, who was formerly with the first team, and now he's at LAFC. So I can't really take credit for those visuals and the presentation. But yeah, I would always say as a heuristic, like simpler is better when you're first starting out.
Awesome. And then we have one more question, and then we'll get into our last presenter here. But what KPIs do you monitor for your team slash players?
KPIs, as in, I guess,
Let's go like your weight room metrics,
weight
speed
room.
metrics. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. We will do preseason physical testing for sure. It's hard to do kind of like a full-fledged physical testing battery, especially when you're in season with these older guys, where they're not as able to be robust and ready to go after these matches as maybe the academy guys are. So we'll do a full physical testing battery, 3-4 times a year across the academy throughout all groups. But for our Union 2 guys, if the question is directed for that environment, we'll do our preseason testing. So we'll do some 10-meter and 40-meter testing. We'll do a 505 to look at braking and change of direction. And we'll do a maximal, aerobic capacity test. We'll do a 6-minute time trial there. But really, like between the 10-meter and the maximal fitness test, those things to the point on navigating these in-season challenges, those things are hard to get in when we have 3 games in 8 days, right? So I guess on the less taxing side of things, we'll get CMJs, once every 6 weeks or so, because that's when we'll start our new phase in the weight room. So we'll do that semi-frequently. I think the nightmare for me, where I have hesitation, is committing to this really frequent testing schedule, where I'm trying really hard to get CMJs, multiple times a week. And then it kind of just drops off and isn't actually providing me like actionable feedback for how to train my guys, right? So I've kind of found what worked for me in terms of a testing schedule. But we will look at CMJs and the different sort of metrics you get from that to profile the group. And then we've now this season introduced a 10-5 RSI, which my boss, Ryan Cotter, who just came in, is a big fan of. So he kind of brought that about. So kind of distinguishing between with the CMJ slow stretch shortening cycle ability, and then with the 10-5 fast stretch shortening cycle ability. So that's been kind of an interesting one there. I definitely think before you take any sort of conclusions from tests like that, especially with soccer guys who it's not really a jumping sport like maybe basketball is or volleyball, you need to get many repetitions and familiarization sessions done within your group. Not too many, but at least a few where you know guys are familiarized and know like the skill of the test. So they're not just horrific at the test because they don't know what they're doing, and not because they're lacking in that physical capacity, right? Which I see a lot with our guys, maybe new guys coming in, they just kind of get tense and they're nervous, so they don't know what they're doing and they way underperform. So making sure you get the familiarization right, and then I guess kind of finding the right testing frequency that works for your group and kind of the manpower you have. So again, I'm kind of a one-man band with Union 2. So I'm trying to spin a lot of plates at the same time.
Awesome. Thank you again, Eric, for the presentation and providing those video examples, pictures, graphics into kind of your setup there at Philadelphia. I know you're busy, obviously wearing multiple hats and being in season. So thank you again for taking the time to do this. And